I'm here with artist Seth Apter, who is going to show us a faux encaustic technique. So Seth, for people who don't know, what is encaustic?
Encaustic basically is using wax to cover a surface, but it's expensive, it's toxic, it can be smelly. This is going to be an easy alternative using embossing powder, so we should get started.
Yeah.
We're going to start by creating something to put our faux encaustic over, so I'm going to start with a collage. I just tore up a bunch of pieces of paper, and I'm going to use matte medium just to glue the paper down. I love collages like this because you don't really need to think about where you're going to place anything. You're just going to go, add the glue. I usually add it to the surface, to the back of the piece of paper, stick it right on.
And go right over the top. I love it.
I'm going to grab the next piece and just do it again.
So how do you know sort of when to stop with your collage? Like, when are you actually done with it? Is it just
when it looks like that?
Okay.
No, it's just
meaning that everything is filled, or meaning that there's a focal point. Like
for me, I do it two different ways. I do it that I want to fill the background, and then also that I want to make sure that there's something that the viewer is going to look at.
Okay.
So in this case, it's the eggs, and everything else just recedes in the background. I'm going to now take some dye ink.
Okay.
I like the dye ink for this because it's blendable. I'm using a cosmetic sponge, and I'm just going to take a bunch of different colors. I don't care that the different color inks bleed together because on the sponge, because I want that on the collage.
And you've chosen a lot of inks that sort of coordinate in color, right? Even though that's a red, it's kind of a dusty red.
Yes, I'm going for a vintage look. You really can do any direction you want with this, but for me, I always want to be cohesive, so it might be all brights or it might be all vintage.
Because I was going to say, like, this paper is actually darker than this paper, but once you ink over it, it kind of does blend it into one piece.
It makes it cohesive, but you also do want some differences because it's more interesting when you put the faux encaustic layer, when you have variability underneath.
Oh, really?
Once I feel like, you'll see at the end, once I feel like I've had enough color added on, I'm going to take some markers or pencils, and I'm going to make some marks. Sometimes
now, do you just get a gut feeling? I know, sorry, you were just saying like that when you feel that you're done. Is that just like, I have a gut?
It's intuitive.
It's just intuitive. You have to trust yourself.
You do. And you know what? After you do a few, and if you end up with lots of ones that are unfinished in the end, you know you just need to be making more. Sometimes I'm going to be very even, and sometimes I'm just going to be a little bit wonky. That's one of the beauties of this. I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to add a little bit of what I call a frame around the edge. That's always important to me. And I'm going to go back to my ink pads, and I'm going to run them around the edge.
Direct.
Yeah, DTP they call it, direct to paper. It's that fancy term.
I was going to say, you're not even using paper, though. You're using a piece of canvas board. Could you do this on paper? Could you do it on regular canvas? Could you do it on wood? Like, is there a reason?
All of the above. And in fact, the embossing ink should work on everything. The last thing is I might use the ink pads to add a little bit more marks. You don't just need to use them for blending. And especially if I feel like there's an area perhaps in my collage where not much is going on.
Okay.
So I'm going to darken it up like that.
You can really transform it. And that's, you know, you can get ink pads in triangle shapes and sort of oval shapes, circle shapes, square shapes, so you really can use
just
them.
Pounce and make whatever shape of the ink
Checkerboard.
pad is. Exactly. Once you have that done, it's going to look something like that. You know, again, if you feel like that's not finished enough, by all means, add more. So we're now going to move to the embossing part, which is really the fun part, although this was fun too. You're going to get an embossing ink pad. An embossing ink pad looks like a stamp pad, but instead of having ink, it actually just has glue. It's an adhesive.
Oh, really? I always wondered what the difference was. I know it's stickier and it stays wet longer, but I wasn't sure if the ink was the same thing.
But the truth is that you could do this using dye ink as well. It will stick. Yes, and since dye ink doesn't dry quickly, it will hold the embossing powder. What I'm doing is shaking up the embossing powder, and I'm going to just pour it on.
That embossing powder looks like it has crystals in it or something. It does, and
those crystals make it translucent, and that is the key here.
Okay.
If you use an embossing powder that is opaque and has full coverage, you will lose your collage. You might as well not have made it. So what's really important is that you choose a translucent embossing powder, and you picked up on the crystals. That's what makes it translucent. You're always going to pour it back in.
Right, because that is like, why would you waste it? So you just make a tube and go ahead and pour it back in.
And then you're going to heat it up, and this is where the magic happens.
That looks like a serious heat gun,
like a serious heat gun. I'm all about it. I could strip paint, or I could make an embossing.
Do you ever worry about burning your piece or anything like that?
Yes, and sometimes I actually burn them on purpose.
Really?
But as long as you, yes, I love that look, but as long as you move it around a little bit and you don't hold it too close, you will find that they don't burn.
And what are we looking to happen here?
Well, you're going to see it any second. It usually takes a while, but basically embossing powder works by melting. The heat melts it. You can see what's happening now.
Ooh.
And you can see this has a very rich kind of vintagey and also
well, it makes all those colors
beeswax
so much deeper. And
yes.
you know, you and I were discussing beforehand, I don't like the smell that much of beeswax when I'm melting it, and you know, you don't have any of that here.
Not at all. And it's so quick and it's so easy. So you're going to melt this fully. One of the tricks with creating the faux encaustic is that you want your embossing layer to be quite thick.
Okay.
So we're actually going to continue to heat this up.
Right.
And once it's all heated up, you're going to turn the heat tool off and let it cool. It does not take long to cool.
Okay.
Once it cools, you're going to actually go through the same step two more times.
So you're actually just adding layers. Now, each time
Correct.
you add the embossing powder, first you need to add that glue layer, right, with the embossing ink.
Otherwise, the embossing powder won't stick.
Could you pour embossing powder onto this before it's cool, and would it stick to it, or is that a terrible, messy,
It's an amazing
awful
thing to
idea?
do. It would not work for the full layer of faux encaustic, but right now, if I had a different color embossing powder, I could sprinkle some in as long as the heat tool is not blowing it away.
Okay.
And it will stick and it will melt. So you
Very
can absolutely do that and add different colorations.
Now, do you have to think about anything like make sure that you're heating on top of something that's like fireproof or anything like that, or is this pretty low-tech,
but
easy?
I don't think you really need to.
Okay.
And what you're going to see is you're going to see this beautiful shine that you're going to get. But if you look closely, you're also going to see it's a little bit pitted.
Yes, I see that.
And so some people love that, and I like that often. But for the faux encaustic, what I want is smooth, which is why I'm going to do this 2 more times really quickly. Just layer this once it's cool, add the embossing powder,
and do it.
It's going to end up looking like that finished piece. It's nice and waxy and creamy, and it has a beautiful vintage surface to it.
And that's lots of layers of just embossing powder.
Exactly, it's so simple. And there's so much more you can actually do with this. If you look at the piece next to it, you'll see there's metal embellishments. Those are not added with glue. When the embossing powder is hot, if you just press the metal in, it actually will dry and stick.
So
Isn't that
cool.
amazing?
And can you add more embossing powder on top of that?
You absolutely can. And in fact, I did sprinkle some green color.
That's awesome. It's kind of like the collaging we did at the beginning, where you had the glue under and over, but you're using the embossing powder and the embossing ink to do that.
To do that as well. And if you look at the piece next to that, it doesn't have the shine. It's more of a true encaustic look. It's so simple to do. You just grab the same matte medium you used for the collage and put a layer over it. Takes away the shine, and it really gives it that sort of smoky look that
beeswax has.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the piece in front, I love my texture, so I added some texture with just some pieces of book cloth, and I just embedded it in because, again, it serves not only as a way to create the encaustic layer, but it serves as glue.
So you know what? We've been talking about when to stop, Seth, and what I realize is it's never time to stop.
Never stop.
Just keep making.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much.